Chapter 7. The Element of Surprise. As I sat at the big round table between my mom and dad, I felt like I was trapped in a sandwich. It was mealtime in the principal's office, and the main dish was sliced Nora. Mrs. Hackney liked big meetings. She always had. Almost every other week, they called an early school assembly, or an or fifth grade meeting, or an or second grade meeting, or some kind of gathering of kids and teachers. She said it gave the school cohesiveness. She said it created good group dynamics for all of us to see each other's faces. And she said meeting as a large group helped us solve our problems or together or at once. That was clearly what she had in mind today. Mrs. Hackney sat down and took charge. Since Mr. and Mrs. Rowley asked for all of you to be here, perhaps they should mention a few of the concerts they shared with me this morning. Then maybe Nora's teachers can explain things from their perspective. And if she wants to, maybe Nora could share a little too. How does that sound? My mom nodded and smiled and cleared her throat. She was happy to talk first. Principals and teachers and counselors didn't frighten her one bit. She'd been trying to boss them around for ages, ever since the time she tried to push Anne into the gifted program 2 years early. My mom said, "We really appreciate all of you taking the time to come and talk. It's one of those things we've always loved about the Philbrook schools. Our first concert today, apart from Nora's grades themselves, is that we had no warning that there was a problem, not so much as a note or a phone call. And we'd like to understand how that happened." Nobody said anything for about 3 seconds. Then Mrs. Byron said, "I can only speak about Nora's grade in library skills, of course, but it's pretty clear what happened." Mrs. Byron had her grade book open on the table in front of her. So did all my other teachers. My heart was pounding so hard that I was sure my mom and dad would hear it. Mrs. Byron ran her index finger along a row of numbers. On the first 3 quizzes and our first reference research, Nora got scores that averaged out to about 72%, which is a low C. And that's what she had at the 7th week of the term. That's when we mail out academic warnings to parents. And since Nora didn't have a D or lower, there was no warning. Then on the next quiz and our final internet research project, Nora did quite poorly, and that pulled her grade down. I entered her scores, calculated the average, and there it was. Mrs. Byron looked at me and smiled. Nora is one of the library's very best customers, so I didn't like having to give her a D. But that's the way it happened. Mrs. Chang nodded. "Exactly," she said. "Numbers are numbers, and an average is an average." Same thing in science and math classes for Nora. Her grades dropped off right at the end of the term, and that was it. No warning for you, no warning for me. All my other teachers started nodding and agreeing. Mr. McKay cleared his throat and said, "Ditto in gym class, sis or Tom." Then a big fat F on the obstacle of course fitness challenge dropped her to a D. I could tell my dad didn't like it when Mr. McKay said big fat F, but I sort of enjoyed it. I was proud of that F. I was probably the only kid in the history of the school to fail the obstacle course fitness challenge. It took a lot of creativity to look completely uncoordinated and totally out of shape. Dr. Trindler said, "I'd like to make an observation." He was the guidance counselor. He was also the psychologist for the school district. He opened a big folder and started shuffling papers around. I knew what that folder was. It was the Nora Rowley folder and all the records from my past 5 years at Philbrook Elementary School. As he looked at the papers on the table, Dr. Trindler put the palms of his hands together and then flexed them apart so only the tips of his long, thin fingers were touching apart together. It made his hands look like a spider doing push-ups on a mirror. He adjusted his glasses and then tried to smile at my parent. He didn't look at me. "Mr. and Mrs. Rowley, I know this sort of report card can be upsetting, but honestly, grades like this aren't that far out of line with Nora's mastery testing profile or with her academic history here at the elementary school. The Philbrook school system has very high standards. Nora's been an average student right there in the middle, with room to move either way, and sometimes grades can get tipped downward instead of upward. That's all. And sometimes performance can be related to all sorts of things. Things like unusual stress at home, like losing a job, or perhaps a death in the family. Sometimes even little disturbances can make a big difference. Right away, my dad leaned forward and said, "Are you pushing this problem back at me? Is that what you're doing? We're not talking about my job or our family life here. You people handed out almost a dozen these and you didn't even know what each other was doing. No one stepped up to help a kid who clearly needed some. And now it's somehow my fault." "I don't like the sound of that, not at all," Mrs. Hackney said. "I'm sure Dr. Trindler didn't mean to make it sound like this was anyone's fault. Mr. Rowley, we're certainly not trying to assign and blame her here. We just want to understand and that what happened so we can make the right adjustments." My dad didn't sit back, and Mrs. Hackney didn't want to ask him if he had more to say, because he probably did. So she kept talking and said, "Well, one person we haven't heard from yet is Nora." Then looking at me, Mrs. Hackney smiled and said, "Nora, is there anything you can tell us that would help us understand what happened at the end of the grading term?" This meeting wasn't something I had planned for, but it was an interesting opportunity. I had all my teachers and my parents together in one place. I could make a big impression on everyone all at once. So I tried to stay calm and I decided I needed to say something. remarkable. I needed to find something surprising, something that would make everybody wonder. I said, because I was trying to think of something amazing. And then I said, well, because I was still thinking. And then I found it the perfect thing to say. I said, I guess I didn't do very well in my classes and everything. But I'm not mad about my grades. I like this. I felt to my mom and dad's Stephen. Mrs. Hackney paused a moment, then slowly she said, You like this? What do you mean, Nora? You know this. I said, These have a pretty shape. And I kept this blank, happy little smile on my face. The room went dead silent, and I realized another fact. When I needed to be, I'm a pretty good actor. Mrs. Hackney was the first person in the audience to come back to life. She had said, That's very interesting, Nora. Mrs. Hackney glanced once around the table. She said, Well, perhaps we've all got enough to think about for right now. I know everyone here will be working to help Nora earn better grades in this new term, and I know our staff will do their best to stay in touch with her parents. She paused and then she said, There is one other thing, something I talked about with Mr. and Mrs. Rowley this morning. I suggested that it might be helpful if we give Nora some additional evolution, and they agreed. That way we can know the best kind of help to offer. So this is a heads up because Dr. Trindler might need to make Nora out of class now and then over the next few days. Looking around the table with a smile, Mrs. Hackney said, All right then. If no one has anything else, our little meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming. I looked at the clock. The meeting had only lasted 9 minutes. If it had felt longer than that, it probably had felt a lot longer to my mom and dad. Out in the hall, my dad said, Do you have all your things, Nora? I'm going to drop you two off at home. I nodded, so we went out the door. When we got outside, I had to trot to keep up with my mom. When we were halfway to the car, she said, What in the world were you talking about in there, Nora? You like the shape of this? What did you mean by that? I shrugged. Nothing. It was just something to say. My dad muttered, more like something that made no sense. There wasn't much chit-chat in the car during the ride home, so I analyzed the situation, and here's what I came up with. 1. I had a gang of grown-ups thinking about my grades. 2. Plus they were convinced I was an idiot. My mom was too upset. 3. My mom was so upset she couldn't chat. 4. My dad was ready to take a punch at someone. 5. The school was going to do some additional evolution of me. And I decided that all in all, it had been a pretty good day.